The dawn broke over Leyte Guelph on October 20th, 1944. Not with the silence of a tropical morning, but with the thunder of the greatest armada the Pacific had ever seen. A steel horizon of American resolve, aiming to shatter the Japanese hold on the Philippines. General Douglas MacArthur was poised to wade ashore and deliver his promise of return. Yet, as the salt water dried on the boots of the infantrymen securing the beachhead, a terrifying reality began to settle in the dense, suffocating jungles surrounding Tacloban airfield. The enemy was not merely in front of them. The enemy was everywhere, dissolved into the canopy, hidden in the weave of vines and hardwoods. Invisible ghosts raining sniper fire down upon soldiers who had no targets to shoot back at. The Japanese infantry doctrine had mastered the verticality of the jungle, placing riflemen high in the trees, sometimes 70 feet off the ground, where they could observe every American movement and pick off men with impunity. For the G is on the ground, the psychological terror was absolute. As the crack of a rifle from nowhere was followed by the slump of a comrade, and return fire was nothing more than a desperate waste of ammunition into the uncaring green void. But parked silently on the perimeter of the airfield, waiting for an aerial enemy that would never truly arrive, sat a weapon of terrifying potential, a machine built for the sky that was about to become the nightmare of the ground. This is the story of the M45 Quadmount, the weapon that turned the jungle from a sanctuary into a slaughterhouse, and how a desperate improvisation by the 211th Anti-Aircraft Artillery Battalion changed the face of combat in the Pacific theater forever. The M45 was a masterpiece of lethal engineering, a unified turret system mounting 4.50 caliber M2 Browning heavy machine guns, known affectionately and fearfully as the meat chopper or the kraut mower by those who had seen it work in Europe. Developed by the Maxson Corporation, this system was designed to track and destroy low-flying Luftwaffe fighters and Japanese dive bombers, capable of traversing 360 degrees and elevating to track targets moving at hundreds of miles per hour. When all four guns roared to life, they synchronized to deliver a combined rate of fire of nearly 2,200 rounds per minute, a storm of lead that delivered 37 armor-piercing projectiles every single second. Each bullet left the barrel at nearly 3,000 feet per second, carrying enough kinetic energy to punch through an inch of armor plate or shatter concrete blocks. And when focused on a single point, the destructive power was simply physics taken to its most violent extreme. These turrets were mounted on the M16 Halftrack, a hybrid vehicle that combined the speed of a truck with the cross-country mobility of a tank, allowing the weapon to move through the mud and broken terrain of the Pacific Islands, where lesser vehicles would bog down and die. The 211th Battalion had arrived at Tacloban with the expectation of a classic anti-aircraft mission, scanning the skies for Zeros and Betties, but by late October 1944, the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service had been decimated, their carriers sunk or neutralized, and their land-based aircraft swept from the skies by the overwhelming superiority of us, Navy Hellcats and Army Air Force Lightnings. The gunners of the 211th found themselves sitting in the sweltering heat, swatting mosquitoes and watching the humidity rise while just a few hundred yards away, infantry units were being bled white by unseen snipers in the tree line. It was a maddening paradox. Possessing the most devastating rapid-fire weapon system in the American arsenal, yet sitting idle, while riflemen died because of a rigid adherence to the idea that anti-aircraft guns were only for aircraft. The breakthrough did not come from a general in the Pentagon or a tactician in a war room, but from the muddy, blood-soaked reality of the front line where necessity is the mother of all tactical innovation. Someone whose name has been lost to the fog of history but whose impact remains undeniable. Looked at the dense wall of jungle foliage where the enemy was hiding, and then looked at the 4 heavy barrels of the M45 and realized that if the enemy would not come down from the trees, they would bring the trees down to the enemy. The first test of this theory at Tacloban was not a battle. It was an execution of nature itself. When an infantry unit reported taking fire from a specific sector of the forest, an M16 Halftrack roared out of its revetment, its tracks churning the mud as it maneuvered into a firing position. The gunner, seated in the armored tub between the ammunition chests, spun the electric turret, the heavy motors whining as the Quadmount traversed to face the green wall. There was no need to spot the individual sniper, no need to find the specific branch where a Japanese soldier was tied to the trunk. The gunner simply aimed at the tree line, depressed the foot pedal, and unleashed hell. The sound was not a rattle, but a deep, tearing roar, often described by veterans as the sound of a giant canvas ripping apart. A noise so loud it could be felt in the chest cavities of men a mile away. In seconds, thousands of rounds of .50 caliber ammunition slammed into the forest. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Hardwood trees, some 2 feet in diameter, were not merely splintered but were sawed completely in half by the sheer volume of fire, toppling over with crashing finality. The canopy disintegrated, leaves and branches exploding into a cloud of green mist and wood chips. Any Japanese soldier hiding in that sector, whether a sniper tied to a branch or an observer in a hideout, was either ripped apart by the heavy bullets or crushed as their arboreal fortress collapsed around them. The psychological impact on the Japanese forces was devastating, for they had spent years believing the jungle was their ally, a place where they could fight on their own terms. But suddenly the Americans had a weapon that could erase the jungle itself. If you have watched this far into the narrative, pause for a moment and recognize that you possess a level of focus and intellectual curiosity that is rare in today's world of fleeting distractions, proving that you are the type of person who seeks to understand the deeper, grittier truths of history rather than just skimming the surface. It is important to note that every single video on this channel is constructed from rigorous, deep dive research and verified historical records, because we believe that the truth of what these men endured is far more compelling than any fiction. This tactic, born of frustration at Tacloban, spread like wildfire across the Pacific theater, moving from unit to unit through the informal brotherhood of the front lines. By the time the US Army pushed onto the main island of Luzon in 1945, the use of anti-aircraft weapons for ground support had become standard operating procedure, officially recognized in tactical bulletins but practically perfected by the gun crews themselves. On Luzon, they faced the Shobu Group under General Tomoyuki Yamashita, the Tiger of Malaya, who had withdrawn his 152,000 men into the mountainous spine of the island to fight a war of attrition. Here, the terrain was even more unforgiving, a vertical labyrinth of ridges, caves, and fortified slopes where tanks could not climb and artillery often could not find the angle. But the M16 Halftracks could climb. They clawed their way up muddy trails and positioned themselves on ridgelines, acting as mobile pillboxes that could suppress entire mountainsides. Japanese pillboxes, reinforced with logs and earth, were chewed to pieces by the sustained fire of the Quad 50s. Cave entrances, often hiding mortar teams or machine gun nests, were flooded with high-velocity lead. the rounds ricocheting off the rock walls and turning the interior into a blender of shrapnel and stone. The 211th Battalion, along with other units like the 209th, found themselves fighting a dual war, scanning the skies in the rare moments when a kamikaze threat appeared, but spending the vast majority of their combat time grinding the Japanese defenses into dust. The M45 proved to be the ultimate counter-ambush weapon, for its turret could spin 60 degrees per second, faster than any human could run, meaning that if a Japanese unit attempted to charge the vehicle from the flanks or rear, the gunner could spin the mount and cut them down before they covered half the distance. The Japanese response was frantic and desperate. Captured documents revealed that enemy commanders specifically ordered their troops to avoid engaging the automatic cannon vehicles unless they had overwhelming surprise, and the practice of tying snipers to trees was largely abandoned because it became a death sentence. The sound of the Quad 50 became a psychological weapon in its own right, a herald of destruction that caused hardened Japanese veterans to freeze in their foxholes. This adaptability of the M45 system highlights a critical lesson in military history, that the greatest weapon is often not the one designed for the specific task, but the one that is available and wielded with creativity. The M45 was not designed to mow down forests, just as the mess tins were not designed to dig foxholes, but in the crucible of war, utility outweighs intent. The legacy of this improvisation extended far beyond the closing days of World War II. When the Korean War erupted in 1950, the M45 was pulled out of mothballs, not to shoot down MiG-15 jets, which were far too fast for its mechanical tracking, but to stop the human wave attacks of the Chinese and North Korean infantry. In the frozen hills of the Chosin Reservoir and the perimeter of Busan, the Quad 50s again proved their worth, laying down curtains of fire that broke the backs of massed infantry assaults. And the story did not end there. 2 decades later, in the steaming jungles of Vietnam, the M45 found a new home on the back of 5-ton trucks, creating the legendary gun trucks that escorted convoys through the ambush alleys of the Central Highlands. Vehicles with names like the Eve of Destruction and King Kong mounted these World War II relics to fight a new enemy, the Viet Cong, proving that the physics of 4 heavy machine guns firing in unison never becomes obsolete. The men who crewed these weapons, from the 211th in Leyte to the convoy defenders in Vietnam, shared a unique bond, a knowledge of the raw, unadulterated power they controlled. It was a brutal, deafening, shaking experience to fire the quad, sitting in the open air, exposed to the elements, breathing the acrid smoke of thousands of burnt powder charges, watching the tracers arc out like a stream of liquid fire. They were the unsung architects of victory in the jungle, the men who cleared the path for the riflemen, who turned the terrifying unknown of the canopy into a manageable battlefield. We must remember that while history often records the movements of divisions and the strategies of generals, the war was fought and won by individuals like Corporal Harry Funk of the 211th, men whose records may have been lost in the 1973 archives fire, but whose actions echo through the decades. They were young men, far from home, who took a piece of machinery and transformed it into a legend. The effectiveness of the Quad 50 against ground targets is a testament to the ingenuity of the American soldier, who, when faced with an impossible tactical problem, refused to accept defeat and instead reinvented the tools at hand. It serves as a reminder that doctrine is a guide, not a chain, and that on the battlefield, the only rule that truly matters is what works. As we look back on the liberation of the Philippines and the long, bloody road to Tokyo. We must give credit not just to the aircraft carriers and the tanks, but to the half-tracks and their crews who mowed down the jungle to find the enemy hidden within. This story of adaptation and firepower is a crucial chapter in our military heritage, a demonstration of how the tools of war evolve in the hands of those who use them. Before we conclude this journey into the past, I have a special announcement for our dedicated community. We are preparing to launch an exclusive Q&A session where I will be answering your most burning questions about military history, the research process behind these documentaries, and the untold stories we have yet to uncover. So please prepare your questions and stay tuned for the date. Now, if this story of American ingenuity and overwhelming firepower resonated with you, if you believe that these stories of the 211th Battalion and the M45 Quadmount deserve to be remembered and honored, then I urge you to take action right now. Click that like button to help this video reach more history enthusiasts. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the reality of the Pacific War, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you never miss a briefing on the forgotten chapters of our past. Tell us in the comments below where you are watching from and what piece of military history you want us to uncover next.